Welcome to TB Dahl Audiobooks. Before the story begins, please take a quick second to subscribe and leave a comment below. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, enjoy the listen.
Stockholm appeared as a thickening of traffic and architecture around the water. Katarina directed them to the Viking Line terminal at Stadsgården rather than the Tallink-Silja departure point at Värtahamnen. She said she knew the terminal layout. What she meant, Elliot understood, was that she'd used it before, probably more than once, probably under circumstances similar to these. He parked the Volvo in a commercial lot 3 blocks from the terminal and wiped the steering wheel, gear shift, and door handles with a cloth from the emergency bag. Not because the car was stolen. It belonged to an honest Russia-linked trust, Katarina said, but because habits were cheaper than consequences. They walked to the terminal separately, Katarina first, then Riley 60 seconds later, then Elliot. The terminal building smelled of diesel, coffee, and the particular antiseptic sweetness of Scandinavian public infrastructure. Katarina bought 3 one-way tickets to Helsinki at the counter, economy cabin, cash. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes and a lanyard that read Julia, didn't look at any of them long enough to form a memory. The ship was enormous, a floating hotel and shopping mall that held 2,000 passengers and smelled like carpet cleaner and cinnamon rolls. Elliot hated it immediately. Too many corridors, too many people, too many angles he couldn't cover. The economy cabin was windowless and barely large enough for the 2 bunks and a fold-out that dropped from the wall. Katarina took the fold-out without discussion. Riley claimed the lower bunk. Elliot sat on the upper bunk with his back against the wall and his feet hanging off the edge. The ship shuddered as it left the quay. The engine vibrations settled into the walls like a living pulse. "Sleep," Katarina said. "Both of you. I'll be awake." "You slept in the car," Elliot said. "I rested my eyes. It's not the same thing, but it's enough at my age." Riley pulled off her boots and lay on the lower bunk, facing the wall. She didn't close her eyes. Elliot could see the tension across her shoulders, the deliberate control in her breathing. She was thinking. He'd learned to recognize the difference between Riley sleeping, Riley pretending to sleep, and Riley running scenarios behind closed lids. This was the third. He waited until the cabin was quiet, then pulled out his notebook and drew the church from Katarina's description. She'd given them a name, Pyhän Kolminaisuuden kirkko, the Holy Trinity Church, not the main Helsinki Orthodox Cathedral on Kanavakatu, but a smaller chapel connected to the old emigre community, and an address on a side street in Kruununhaka. Elliot sketched the block from memory of the map Riley had shown him, marking intersections, probable sightlines, and the narrow lane Katarina said ran behind the building to a courtyard shared with a residential block. 2 entrances he could plan for. Unknown number he couldn't. He folded the notebook and pressed it flat under his leg. The ship moved through the Baltic with a slow, heavy roll that felt nothing like the sea, and everything like the world tilting on an axis he couldn't see. Helsinki arrived in the gray light of an October morning. The harbor was industrial at the edges and photogenic at the center. Cranes, ferry terminals, a marketplace, and the copper-green domes of the Uspensky Cathedral climbing the hillside above the waterfront. The air tasted of salt, diesel, and something colder than Stockholm, a sharpness that came off the Gulf of Finland and carried the memory of Russian winters in its teeth. They disembarked in the middle of the passenger flow. Katarina wore a scarf pulled forward and dark glasses she'd taken from the emergency bag. Riley had tied her hair back and changed into a plain navy jacket from the same bag. Elliot wore a ball cap he'd bought from the ship's shop, the only purchase he'd made on board, paid in Swedish kroner from the safe house cash. Outside the terminal, Katarina stopped at a kiosk and bought a prepaid Finnish SIM card. She inserted it into one of the burner phones from the emergency supplies and typed a message. Short. She held the phone at an angle that prevented Riley or Elliot from reading it, which told Elliot she was using a phrasing or protocol she didn't want them to memorize. "He'll confirm within the hour," she said, pocketing the phone. "We wait." They found a cafe 2 blocks from the harbor, on a street that was busy enough to provide cover and wide enough to give Elliot sightlines in both directions. He chose the table nearest the back wall, facing the entrance. Riley sat across from him, with her back to the window. Katerina sat at the end, between them, her document case on the chair beside her, like a quiet third companion. The coffee was good. Finnish roast, lighter than Norwegian, with a sharpness that matched the air. Elliot drank it black and watched the street. "You mentioned custodians earlier," Riley said to Katerina. "Separate from keepers. Explain the difference." "Keepers protect people. Custodians protect objects, documents, records, physical evidence. Father Alexei has never met you. He doesn't know your faces, your names, or your current identities. He knows that File 17 exists. He knows that the Helsinki archive holds material related to the Petrograd-Vyborg escape route. And he knows that the baptismal record was deposited in the church collection decades before he was assigned responsibility for it." "Assigned by whom?" "The table. In 1983. 41 years ago." Riley turned her coffee cup between her palms. "Has he ever been asked to produce the record before?" "Twice. Both times by other custodians conducting authentication reviews. Both times, the document was examined in place and returned. It has never left the archive." Elliot set his cup down. "Until now." Katerina's phone vibrated against the table. She picked it up, read the screen, and returned it to her pocket with the precise economy of someone for whom this gesture was rehearsed. "He'll meet us at 3 o'clock. The church. Side entrance on Pormestarinrinne." "That's 5 hours," Elliot said. "He needs time to prepare the archive room and confirm his own safety. He hasn't opened the sealed collection in 2 years. There's a protocol." 5 hours was too long. Elliot felt it in his chest, the particular compression of time that happened when you were exposed in an unfamiliar city with limited exits and no fallback position. But pushing Father Alexei faster would mean pressuring a 78-year-old man who held the keys to the evidence they needed. And that was a calculation with only one correct answer. "We stay mobile," he said. "No hotel. No fixed location until 3. They paid cash and left the cafe at intervals. Elliot walked the Kruunenhaka district for 90 minutes, learning the streets the way he learned construction sites, block by block, corner by corner, noting the width of sidewalks, the placement of cameras, the rhythm of foot traffic, the gaps between buildings where a person could step out of sight. Riley walked a parallel route 2 blocks north, familiarizing herself with the transit connections and the location of the nearest police station, hospital, and embassy. They met briefly in a park on Meritulinkatu, exchanged observations, and separated again. At 2:20 p.m., Elliot reached the church. Pyhän Kolminaisuuden kirkko sat on a quiet street in the old quarter, wedged between a residential building and a former merchant's house that had been converted into offices. The church itself was modest, brick and stone, painted pale yellow with white trim, an onion dome in miniature that marked it as Orthodox rather than Lutheran. The main entrance faced the street. The side entrance on Pormestarinrinne was half a flight below street level, accessible through a wrought iron gate and a short set of stone stairs that descended to a wooden door. Elliot walked past without stopping. He circled the block once, identifying the courtyard access behind the residential building, the narrow lane that connected Pormestarinrinne to the next street, and the sight lines from the upper floors of the surrounding buildings. Two windows in the office conversion had a direct view of the side entrance. Both were dark. A security camera above a jewelry shop on the corner covered the intersection, but not the church gate. He completed his circuit and positioned himself at a bus stop 30 meters from the church with a clear view of both the side entrance and the street approach from the south. He texted Riley, "Clean. Gate is visible from the bus stop. I'll watch the approach. Come from the north."
At 2:48, Katarina appeared on Pormestarinrinne, walking with the measured pace of someone who knew the street and had no reason to hurry. She descended the stairs and knocked on the wooden door. 3 short raps, a pause, then 2 more. The door opened inward. A hand appeared, broad and dark-knuckled, and Katarina stepped through. Riley arrived from the north at 2:55, her collar turned up and her pace unremarkable. She caught Elliot's eye at the bus stop without turning her head. He gave a single nod. She descended the stairs and the door opened before she knocked. Elliot waited 4 more minutes. He watched a delivery truck pass, a woman with a stroller, an elderly man in a dark overcoat who walked slowly along the opposite sidewalk, paused at a lamppost, and continued around the corner. Nothing held Elliot's attention long enough to trigger alarm. He left the bus stop, crossed the street, descended the stairs, and knocked. The door opened onto a vestibule that smelled of old wood, candle wax, and something mineral, stone dust or cold plaster. The man who held the door was not tall, but was wide across the shoulders in a way that suggested a frame once powerful, now settled into the density of age. His beard was white and full, trimmed to the jawline. His eyes were dark brown, deep-set beneath heavy brows, and they examined Elliot with the focused patience of someone accustomed to reading faces in dim light. "You are the brother," Father Alexei Morozov said. His Norwegian was non-existent. His English carried a Finnish accent laid over something older, something Slavic and worn smooth by decades. "Elliot. I know, Katarina told me your names. I did not ask for them." He closed the door and turned a deadbolt that looked newer than the frame it sat in. "This way." The vestibule led into a narrow corridor that ran along the back of the church's nave. Through a half-open door, Elliot glimpsed the sanctuary, icons in gold leaf, a wooden iconostasis, votive candles burning in clusters of amber light. The air in the corridor was 10 degrees colder than outside, trapped in stone walls that predated Finnish independence. Father Alexei led them down a flight of worn steps into the basement. The stairs were stone, each tread hollowed by a century of footsteps. At the bottom, he unlocked a steel fire door with a key from a ring at his belt. Behind the door, a second corridor, this one lined with shelving. Metal archive boxes, uniform and labeled with Cyrillic notation in faded ink, filled the shelves from floor to ceiling. The room at the end was larger than Elliot expected. A long wooden table ran its center, flanked by chairs. Strip lighting overhead gave the space a flat, institutional cast that contrasted with the church above. Filing cabinets lined 3 walls. The 4th wall held a map, hand-drawn, old, mounted behind glass, showing the Gulf of Finland, the Karelian Isthmus, and a route marked in red ink from Petrograd through Vyborg to the Finnish border. Riley stood before the map. Katarina sat at the table with her document case open. Father Alexei moved to the filing cabinets with the certainty of a man navigating his own home in the dark. "This archive was established in 1920, he said, pulling open a drawer and examining the contents without removing them. The church served the Russian Orthodox community in Helsinki. After the revolution, after the Civil War, Finnish churches became places where refugees could record what had happened to them. Births, deaths, marriages, lost children, changed names." He closed the drawer and opened another. "Not all of these records are religious. Some are testimony. Some are concealment. False guardianships, altered identities, children given new names so that their real names would not attract the Cheka,
and later the NKVD, and later the KGB. He looked at Riley. Your bloodline is not the only one that passed through this room. Hundreds of families used these churches as a bridge between who they were and who they needed to become. But ours is the only one with a 100-year-old secret society attached to it, Riley said. Father Alexei's mouth moved behind his beard, the suggestion of a smile that never fully formed. Honest Russia asked me to preserve documents. I preserve documents. I do not participate in their politics. He pulled a thick manila folder from the third cabinet and carried it to the table. This is the Orlova collection. He placed it in front of Katerina, who opened it with hands that were steady but slow. Riley moved to the table. Elliot remained standing, positioned where he could see both the room and the corridor through the open door. The folder contained roughly 40 pages. Some were typed, some handwritten, some printed on paper that had gone sepia with age. Katerina separated them into groups with practiced efficiency: travel documents in one stack, correspondence in another, official records in a third, and loose notes in a fourth.
Elena Pavlovna Orlova, Katerina said, touching the first travel document. These are her papers from 1918. Riley leaned over the table. The document was a travel permit issued in Petrograd, dated March 1918. The name on the permit was not Orlova. It read, Elena Pavlovna Mikhailova. The stated destination was Vyborg. The stated purpose was family relocation due to civil disturbance. A stamp from a local authority bore a date 1 week later. Mikhailova, Riley said. She changed her surname. Common practice, Father Alexei said from beside the filing cabinet. Orlova was minor aristocracy. After February 1917, aristocratic names became dangerous. After October, they became lethal. She took a common patronymic form, Mikhailova, daughter of Mikhail, or wife of Mikhail. Either reading was unremarkable. Riley picked up the second document. Another travel permit, this one from Vyborg, dated 2 weeks after the first. The name had changed again. E.P. Mikhailova was now accompanied by a dependent, listed as a male child, age approximately 8 months, named Alyosha Mikhailov. Alyosha, Riley said quietly. Diminutive of Alexei. Yes, Katerina said. The third document was a Finnish border registration, typed on thin paper with a Finnish language header and Russian language entries. E.P. Mikhailova, age 26, accompanied by one child, male, Alyosha Mikhailov, age approximately 10 months. The date placed them crossing the border in late spring 1918. A handwritten note in the margin, in Finnish, read, Refugee, no return papers, referred to Suomenlinna processing. Riley arranged the 3 documents side by side. The child's age changes between documents. 8 months in Vyborg, 10 months at the border. The dates are only 2 weeks apart. You noticed, Father Alexei said. Deliberate? Almost certainly. Inconsistencies in age, weight, and physical description were a common technique for protecting refugee children. If someone searched for a child matching a specific description, the conflicting records would create confusion. Was the child 8 months old or 10? Born in January or in March? These small contradictions were a form of camouflage. Riley pulled a notebook from her jacket and began copying the names, dates, and document reference numbers. Her handwriting was small and precise, each entry followed by a question mark or an annotation. Elliot watched the corridor. The stone walls muffled sound from the street above, but he could feel the faint vibration of traffic through the floor. Buses, probably, on the main road 2 blocks east. He counted the filing cabinets. 14. Each held at least 4 drawers. Each drawer contained hundreds of pages.
The entire history of a displaced community, compressed into metal boxes in a church basement. He moved to the corridor and climbed 3 steps, enough to see the fire door. Closed, locked from their side. He returned to the archive room and crossed to the far wall, where a narrow window at ceiling height looked out at street level through thick, reinforced glass. The window was dirty, but through it he could see a strip of sidewalk and the lower portion of the wrought iron fence surrounding the church grounds. A man walked past. Dark coat, moderate pace. Elliot registered the shape and filed it. "Katerina," Riley said from the table. "The route matches what Henrik's letter described. Petrograd to Viborg to Finland. But these papers only prove that a woman named Mikhailova traveled with a young child. They don't prove the child was connected to Michael Alexandrovich." "That's what the baptismal record does," Katerina said. "Father Alexei?" The priest had moved to the last cabinet against the back wall. This one was different from the others. Smaller, freestanding, with a lock that required a separate key. Father Alexei produced it from an inner pocket of his cassock and inserted it with the care of a surgeon. The drawer opened on oiled runners. Inside, Elliot could see document sleeves, archival plastic, the kind used in museum conservation. Father Alexei counted them with his fingertips, touching each sleeve without removing it, his lips moving in a count that was either numerical or prayer. He stopped. His hand rested on a sleeve near the middle of the drawer. He didn't pull it out. Instead, he spread the sleeves on either side of it, the way a doctor would part tissue to examine a wound. "Katerina," he said. His voice had changed. The measured calm had thinned to something brittle. She stood and crossed the room. Elliot watched the old woman's posture shift as she looked into the drawer. A straightening of the spine followed by a stillness that communicated more than speech. "When did you last open this cabinet?" Katerina asked. 2 years ago. The authentication review. I examined every document in this drawer. All were present. All were intact. And since then? No one has opened it. I hold the only key. I carry it here. He touched his chest. It does not leave my person. Riley looked up from her notes. "What's wrong?" Katerina lifted a document sleeve from the drawer and held it to the light. The sleeve was intact, sealed along its edge with an archival adhesive strip. Inside, Elliot could see a single sheet of aged paper, handwritten, dense with Cyrillic script, bearing what appeared to be an official seal at the bottom. "This is the page before the baptismal entry," Katerina said. "A church register page listing arrivals at the emigre parish in Helsinki, dated 1919. This page is present." She lifted the next sleeve. Inside, another sheet, this one typed, with signatures at the bottom and a small cross stamped in red ink beside the header. "This is the page after the baptismal entry. A confirmation of guardianship transfer for a child identified as A.M., dated 1920. This page is also present." She looked at Father Alexei. "The page between them is gone." Father Alexei pulled the remaining sleeves from the drawer and laid them across the table, one by one, with the gentleness of a man handling relics. 12 sleeves total. Riley counted them as they appeared. Each contained a single document. Register entries, correspondence fragments, parish records, marginal notes. The sequence was legible, each page numbered in pencil on the upper right corner. Pages 1 through 6. Then page 8 through 12. Page 7 was missing. "Page 7, Riley said. "Page 7 is the baptismal record," Father Alexei said. He pressed his palms flat on the table. The skin across his knuckles had gone white. "It names the child as Alexei Mikhailovich. It records the baptism date, the officiating priest, and the identity of the father by initials only. M.A.R. The record was handwritten by Father Georgi Volkonsky in 1919, who served this parish for 31 years and never broke a confidence. That page has been in this drawer since 1983, when I assumed custodial responsibility. And now it's gone, Elliot said from the window. Father Alexei closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, though his face remained composed. Yes. Katerina sat down. She placed both hands on the table in front of her, fingers laced, and stared at the gap in the document sequence where page 7 should have been. "The custodian index," she said. "They already used it." Riley looked at her. "How? You said Father Alexei holds the only key." "The key to the cabinet," Father Alexei said. "Not the key to the building." Silence filled the basement room. Elliot turned from the window and looked at the priest. Someone entered the church. The main entrance has 3 locks. The side entrance has 2. The basement fire door has 1. I inspect the archive room every Sunday and Wednesday. I was here 4 days ago. Everything appeared normal. Father Alexei's voice cracked on the last word. He corrected it immediately, pulling his composure back like a man retying a knot in a fraying line. "The cabinet lock shows no sign of forcing. The drawer slides freely. The document sleeves were not disturbed. They were returned to their original positions with the missing sleeve removed cleanly." "Professional," Elliot said. "Yes." Riley picked up the guardianship transfer document, the page that followed the missing baptismal record. She held it under the strip light and studied it. "This page references the baptismal entry. It says, 'As recorded in the parish baptismal register, entry 7, dated 14th March 1919. The child is identified as A.M. The guardian is listed as—'" She squinted. "The name is partially obscured, ink damage, but the first 3 letters are O.R.L. "Orlova," Katerina said. "Elena Pavlovna Orlova accepted formal guardianship of the child in 1920. The church recorded it. The baptismal entry itself named the father." Riley set the page down. "They took the one document that contained Michael Alexandrovich's initials. Everything else is circumstantial without it." "Not circumstantial," Katerina corrected. "Supportive. The travel papers, the guardianship transfer, the age discrepancies, the root. They build a picture. But the baptismal record was the foundation. It was the only document that directly named the father." Elliot left the window and moved to the filing cabinet. He crouched and examined the lock. No scratches on the plate. No tool marks on the cylinder. He pulled the drawer open and checked the runners. Smooth, clean. No debris that would indicate forced entry. He looked at the bottom of the drawer. A thin layer of dust, undisturbed except where the document sleeves had rested. "Picked," he said. "Not forced. Whoever did this used a professional locksmith or a pick set and knew exactly which drawer to target."
"The custodian index maps every document in every location," Katerina said. Her voice had gone flat, the sound of someone confirming what they'd feared and hoped was wrong. "Cabinet number, drawer position, page sequence. If Pavel Orlov sold the index to the FSB, they wouldn't need to search. They would arrive with a shopping list." "When was the index stolen from Rask's apartment?" Riley asked. "Within hours of his death, based on the break-in evidence." "And his death was 6 days ago." Riley checked each document on the table, touching the corners, reading the reference numbers. 6 days to decode the index, identify this location, send someone to Helsinki, pick a lock, remove a single page, and leave without trace. She looked at Katerina. "That's not an improvised operation. That's a standing capability."
Father Alexei crossed himself. The gesture was automatic, the reflex of a man whose body knew how to pray when his mind couldn't find the words. Volkov, Katerina said. Colonel Sergei Volkov, Riley said for Elliot's benefit, though she'd already told him. FSB counterintelligence, Operation Quiet Crown. Elliot straightened from his crouch. The index gives them every location? Every location that was mapped when the index was last updated, Katerina said. Henrik maintained it. His last revision was 8 months ago. How many locations total? 6. I told you at the safe house. Helsinki was the most critical. The baptismal record was the foundation of the entire chain. So they hit the most important target first? Yes. Elliot looked at the ceiling. Above them, through stone and timber and a century of accumulated silence, the church sat on its quiet street in the old quarter of Helsinki. A man had walked past the window 3 minutes ago. Dark coat, moderate pace. Elliot hadn't thought much of it at the time. He moved back to the window and looked out at the strip of sidewalk visible through the reinforced glass. The man was there again. Same dark coat. He stood at the wrought iron fence 30 meters from the side entrance, his body angled toward the church, his right hand raised to his ear in a gesture that could have been a phone call, or could have been something else entirely. His face was turned away, but the posture was wrong for a pedestrian. Too still, too balanced, weight distributed evenly on both feet, the way you stood when you expected to move fast. Elliot shifted his angle. Across the street, the windows of the former merchant's house reflected the late afternoon light in sheets of dull copper. In one of the ground floor windows, dark, unlit, he caught a second reflection, a shape in the glass. A person standing on the same sidewalk as the man in the dark coat, but farther north, positioned at the corner where Pormestarinrin met the adjacent street. 2 watchers, bracketing the church. We have company, Elliot said. Riley stopped writing. Katerina's hands tightened on the table edge. How many? Riley asked. 2 that I can see, one at the fence, one at the corner, positioned to cover the side entrance and the northern approach. The main entrance? I can't see it from here. Assume covered. Father Alexei leaned against the filing cabinet. The color had left his face, draining into his beard and the creased fabric of his cassock. He looked at Katerina with the expression of a man watching the thing he'd spent his life protecting slip beyond his reach. The courtyard, he said. Behind the residential building. There is a door from the boiler room that connects to the shared passage. It exits onto Rauhankatu. Elliot memorized the name. Is it locked? The boiler room key is on this ring. He unclipped it from his belt with hands that trembled only at the edges. The third key, brass, small. Father Alexei, Katerina said, you cannot stay here. This is my church. This is a crime scene. When they realize the page has already been taken, they'll come back to find out what else you have. They'll want to know who visited. They'll want the rest of the Orlova collection. The old priest looked at the table, at the 11 remaining document sleeves laid out in sequence with their gap where page 7 should have been, and his jaw tightened beneath his beard. I will not leave these documents. Then bring them, Riley said. She pulled her bag open and emptied it. Water bottle, notebook, pen, a spare scarf, onto the table. Everything on this table goes in here. Now.
Father Alexei hesitated. His eyes moved from Riley to Katerina to the documents and back. Whatever he saw in Riley's face, the analytical sharpness pressed to its operational edge, the refusal to negotiate with hesitation, broke through his resistance. He began lifting the document sleeves from the table and placing them in Riley's bag with the care of a man transferring icons from a burning church. Katerina packed the Orlova travel documents into her own case. Elliot took the keyring from Father Alexei's hand
and found the brass key. "The boiler room," he said. "Show me." Father Alexei led him through the archive room to a door Elliot had registered earlier but not opened, a maintenance access in the back wall, painted the same institutional gray as the corridor. The brass key turned smoothly. Behind the door, a narrow passage ran between exposed pipes and old ductwork to a larger space where two industrial boilers sat like sleeping animals in the dim light. The air was warmer here, humid, thick with the smell of heating oil and rust. A steel door on the far wall had a push bar. Elliot pressed it. The door opened onto a covered passage between the church and the residential building, brick walls on both sides, concrete underfoot, a gate at the far end that opened onto a street he could hear but not yet see. He walked the passage. The gate was waist-high wrought iron with a simple latch, not locked. Beyond it, a quiet residential street. Rauhankatu, if Father Alexei was right. Elliot looked left and right. No one visible. The buildings on this side had no direct view of the church's front or side entrances. He returned to the archive room. Riley had finished packing the documents. The bag sat on the table, heavy with a century of concealed history. Father Alexei stood beside the empty filing cabinet, with one hand resting on its surface, his fingers spread, as if he were saying goodbye to something he'd touched every week for 4 decades. "Clear passage to Rauhankatu," Elliot said. "No visible surveillance on that side." "They're covering the entrances they know about," Riley said, "which means they've been here before. When they came for the page, they mapped the building." "Then they know about the courtyard." "Maybe. But they stationed themselves at the side entrance and the corner. That tells me they expected us to arrive the way we arrived and leave the way we came in. If they knew the boiler room exit, they'd have someone on Rauhankatu. Or they don't have enough people to cover all exits." "Also possible." Elliot picked up the bag and handed it to Riley. "Either way, we go now." Katerina touched Father Alexei's arm. "Come with us." The priest looked at his church, at the stone walls, the filing cabinets, the map of the escape route from Petrograd that had hung on this wall since before he was born. His hand lifted from the cabinet's surface and fell to his side. "Where?" "Away from here, for now." Father Alexei pulled his coat from a hook behind the door. Heavy wool, dark, smelling of incense and age. He buttoned it to the throat and tucked the empty key ring into his pocket. The cabinet key was already in Elliot's hand. The cabinet was empty. The documents were in bags. The archive room held nothing left to steal. They moved through the boiler room in single file. Elliot first, then Riley, then Father Alexei, then Katerina. The covered passage amplified their footsteps against the brick walls. At the gate, Elliot held up his hand. He listened. Traffic noise from the east, a dog barking 2 blocks away, the hiss of a bus releasing its brakes. He opened the gate and stepped onto Rauhankatu. The street was residential and quiet. A woman pushed a bicycle toward the corner. A delivery van idled outside an apartment building 50 meters south. No dark coats, no stationary figures. No one angled toward the church. "North," Elliot said. "Stay close. Walk normally." They turned north on Rauhankatu and walked. Elliot kept his pace unremarkable and his peripheral vision wide. Riley matched his stride, the bag with the Orlova documents held against her hip. Father Alexei walked with surprising steadiness for a man whose world had been emptied in the past 20 minutes. Katerina brought up the rear, her document case clutched to her chest, her scarf pulled forward, her dark glasses reflecting the gray Helsinki sky. At the end of the block, Elliot looked back once. A figure rounded the corner from Pormestarenrinne onto Rauhankatu. Dark coat, the same posture, balanced, watchful, moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with the residential street he'd just entered.
The man stopped. He scanned the street. His gaze swept north toward the four figures walking away from him at an unhurried pace. Elliot turned forward. He didn't increase his speed. He didn't touch Riley's arm or gesture. He simply walked, measuring the distance to the next intersection and the seconds it would take for the figure behind them to close the gap. "Don't look back," he said. "Next corner, left." They turned left. The new street was busier. Shops, a tram stop, pedestrians carrying groceries. Elliot guided them into the flow of foot traffic and felt the city close around them like water around a dropped stone. Riley's hand found his forearm. Not a grip, a touch, brief and deliberate, that communicated something she couldn't say aloud. He glanced at her. She held the bag tight to her body with her other arm. The Orlova papers, the travel documents, the guardianship transfer, the 11 remaining pages of a 12-page sequence that had once contained the only written proof connecting their bloodline to the last man named in the Romanov succession. The 12th page was gone. The proof they'd crossed 2 countries to recover was already in someone else's hands. But the rest wasn't. Not yet. Elliot steered them toward the tram stop. A number 6 tram approached from the east, its bell sounding once as it slowed. They boarded in the middle car, surrounded by commuters and students, and an old woman with a shopping cart, and the tram carried them west into the city, while behind them, the dark-coated figure stood at the corner they'd turned and spoke into a phone pressed hard against his ear.
The story continues in the next chapter, so make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with fellow book lovers.